You can order the lower control arms used in the video on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Turn your engine off and set the parking brake. Remove the central rim cover to access the nut on the end of the transmission. Use a breaker bar and a 32mm socket to unblock the nut on the end of the transmission. Before lifting your vehicle, it is necessary to measure the distance between the center of your wheel and the wheel arch. This will allow you to achieve an optimal tightening of the parts in their initial position. Loosen the stud bolts on the front wheels. Lift the front of your vehicle. We strongly suggest watching our video on how to jack your Honda Accord safely before carrying out this step. Place the vehicle on the jack stands. To be able to replace the lower control arms on your vehicle, you need to remove the wheels to gain complete access to the suspension system. Don't forget to put the wheels under the vehicle. Brush the nut of the bolt holding the strut fork to the lower control arm, then spray it with penetrating oil. Using a 17mm wrench, a ratchet, and a 17mm socket, unscrew the nut of the retaining bolt. Once unscrewed, you can use a pin punch to remove the bolt. You can then disengage the strut fork from the control arm. It is also necessary to disengage the sway bar end link from the lower control arm. Using a 15mm wrench, unscrew the nut from the lower ball joint. Use a 5mm Allen key to keep the ball joint from rotating. Finish unscrewing the nut on the end of the transmission. Brush the nut of the lower ball joint and spray it with penetrating oil. Loosen the lower ball joint nut using a ratchet and a 17mm socket. And remove the nut. Turn the brake disc inward to make this operation easier. Spray the area where the lower ball joint fits into the lower control arm with penetrating oil to facilitate removal. Using a jack, slightly lift the control arm, resting on the threaded rod of the lower ball joint. With a hammer, hit the part of the control arm where the lower ball joint is inserted to loosen the assembly. Remove the jack. You can now disengage the lower ball joint from the control arm. Brush the two nuts of the lower control arm retaining bolts, and then spray them with penetrating oil. Using a ratchet and a 19mm socket, unscrew the front bushing retaining bolt. Then remove the bolt. Repeat the procedure on the rear bushing bolt, this time using a 17mm socket. You can now remove the rear part of the lower control arm by pulling it towards you and moving it back and forth. Next, disengage the CV axle from the wheel knuckle to remove the front part of the control arm. Brush and grease the control arm area to facilitate its installation. Hey, it's Alex from CarParts.com. If you enjoyed this video and want to support us, like, comment, and subscribe. Okay, back to work. You can order the lower control arms used in the video on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Take the control arm. First, insert the front part of the control arm. Then rotate the control arm to install its rear part. You can use a hammer to insert it properly. Put the front retaining bolt back in place and screw it back in with a ratchet until it makes contact. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Reinsert the rear bushing retaining bolt and screw it back in until it makes contact. It is important that the bushing slides easily into place before you finish tightening it. You must now fit the CV axle back into the wheel knuckle. Roughly put the hub nut back in place. Grease the part of the lower control arm that will be in contact with the lower ball joint. Replace the lower ball joint in the control arm. Next, screw back on the nut until it's tight. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Put the lower ball joint of the sway bar end link back in place. Then screw the nut back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Put the strut foot retaining bolt back on the lower control arm. Then screw the nut back on until it makes contact. To avoid damaging the bushings, you need to tighten the bolt holding the strut fork to the lower control arm and the rear bushing bolt in the vehicle on the ground position. Lift the wheel knuckle with the jack until the original measurement between the center of the wheel and the wheel arch is reached. Once at a distance, finish tightening the bolt with the torque wrench. Do the same with the rear control arm bushing retaining bolt. Remove the jack. Then you will be able to put the wheels back on your vehicle. Put your vehicle back on the ground before properly fixing the wheels in place. You can purchase the parts we used here by visiting our website at CarParts.com. Finish tightening the hub nut once the vehicle is on the ground using a torque wrench. Lift the front of your vehicle. You can now remove the wheel . Crimp the nut on the end of the transmission using a pin punch and a hammer. Then, you will be able to put the wheel back on your vehicle. Put the car back on the ground and block the wheel properly. Operation complete.